people logging on, but I wanted to be conscious of everyone's time and start right at noon. So welcome and thanks for joining the speaker series event today, Building High Performance Teams by Davenport University. Our speaker today is Dan Rundhaug, and he's Executive Director of the Institute for Professional Excellence at Davenport University. Dan has an extensive background in leadership development, team building, strategic planning, and public speaking. So he's a great storyteller and will bring inspiration to you and your team. So Dan, welcome, and thanks for joining us today and speaking.
Kathy, thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and thank you everyone for participating today. I'm really excited to talk about today's topic. As you think about building high-performing teams, that really is essential for everything we do as an individual, certainly as a manager or as a leader. And then as you think from the standpoint of our organizations, it's critical for our teams to be functioning at a very high level. And so I love this concept. I love this topic. I love the idea of teams. We have some teams that we function within our area here at Davenport. The sub team that I'm on, we call ourselves the Dream Team, and the little caveat subtitle is the quote from John Maxwell that says, "Teamwork makes the dream work." And we do believe that teamwork is critical for what we're trying to achieve. And so, how do we build high-performing teams as an organization or as individuals within our organization? So I'm really excited to participate with you today and hope that it's a meaningful experience for all of us as we look through some of this important information. I'm going to have us interact throughout the presentation via chat. So if you look at the menu bar within Zoom, there will be 3 dots that says more. You can click on that. It'll bring chat down for you to engage, maybe just to practice that. If you want to just quickly introduce yourself via chat with your name, your organization, and then where are you joining us from? And what I mean by that is it could be, your work office. It could be, your home office. It could be your living room, because we're still in the partial work from home plan that maybe we don't all have home offices. So just if you can chime in, introducing yourself, where you're located at in your organization. So Kathy, thanks, appreciate that. You're at the chapter, you're at the office with ABC up at Greater Michigan. And I'm the same today. So I'm in my office in Grand Rapids. I do go back and forth from the home office to my work office. Today I'm actually here. So appreciate that. Greg, membership director at ABC, and you're in the Lansing GMC office. So excellent, great. Thanks for that, Greg. Bob from Applied Imaging, reporting from his office in Clio. Is that how you pronounce that? Clio? C-L-I-O? That may or may not be right. Sue, Legal Shield, ID Shield Business Solutions Home Office in Bay City. So excellent. We're still. Oh no! Oh, Bob, you told me I did not pronounce that correctly. So that is my fail on that. We've got Noah with Beerline in Tromby Electric in Bay City, so that's excellent. Charlie Samansky, Alloy Construction Services in the Alloy office in Midland. So excited for all of you to be joining us. Really appreciate that. So as more chime in, that'd be great. I just wanted us to get used to chat. I'll be asking you to chime in here at a few different spots throughout our 60 minutes that we have together. As we think about that, I wanted to go through with you and highlight really how we'll be spending our time together. And so as we think about today's agenda, really what we want to do is just evaluate what makes a great team. Just some dialogue around that. We want to look at team dynamics at work, and we really want to pit kindergartners against MBA students and look at some of the dynamics that experience in team settings at that level. We want to look at learnings from research on teams for teams. And so we'll look at some information that should help us as we think about our teams and what we do. And then I want to look not just at the teams holistically, but also the role of leaders or managers for teams. What do we play in the grander scheme of involvement and engagement in teams? What role do leaders and managers play in this? We'll look at the GROW model as it relates to our conversations that we can and should have within our organizations and within our teams. And then also just a simple model called the ideal team player from Lencioni. So we've got about 60 minutes together that we want to really hopefully spend a good amount of time thinking about what does this mean for me, for my organization. So we'll engage together. I'll present some material, and I think the key takeaways for us is what can I do from today's topic? What are some actions that I can take to impact my team, whether I'm the leader or whether I'm an individual contributor? And to get our wheels kind of moving on this and to kind of start the thinking process, I just have an opening question for you. I'd like you to, thinking from your own mindset about a great team that you were on, I'd like you in chat to describe the characteristics that made it great. As you're thinking about that, this is just a picture of my oldest son's football team from last year, which was an interesting year as they had to work through all the COVID protocols and were they going to do it at all. He was on the 4th and 5th grade football team. And there's a lot of things that I could bring out from his team that I saw as a dad that identified, man, that's a great team. But it doesn't just have to be sports teams. It could be a sports team from when you were in school. It could be a work team, could be a volunteer team. So just think about a great team that you were on and describe some of the characteristics that made it great. So Kathy just chimed in here, said felt included, comfortable to speak and give ideas. Oh man, how incredible is it when you're on a team and you feel like you are actually part of that team, right? As opposed to on the outside looking in, but to feel included, to feel comfortable to speak and generate and give ideas. Great, excellent. Bob talks about camaraderie and culture. The whole concept of camaraderie, culture, what is the overall experience that we have and that's built in to the team experience is critical. And these things are really going to come out and come to light as we think about, what do we do to build high impact teams. Any other thoughts about what are some characteristics that make a great team? Trust. Noah, really appreciate that comment. Trust is vital, right? And without trust, you have the potential to really question what did that person mean when he said this, or why did she do that? Trust creates a type of equilibrium or a significant foundation upon which everything else is built. And I can have really challenging conversations with someone if we have trust with each other, because we know that we're looking out for the best interest of each other and the best interest of the team or the organization. Sue talks about being welcome, right? Happy to have me there. Absolutely. If it feels like you're unwelcomed or it's a burden to have you included, oh my goodness, what a frustration and really demotivator to be involved in a team. Felt comfortable to give ideas and receive others' ideas. Great concept there, not just my ability to participate and to give, but also to listen actively, right? Receive those ideas in, digest them, wrestle with them, contribute. A lot of what we talk about as we think about leadership and development and those types of things are all around not just a right or wrong idea, but moving from a good to a better to a best idea. And as you give and receive ideas, you're really able to help move the organization, move the team down that pathway. Bob again chimed in here with candor, right? Just having a very candid ability to communicate, making sure that there's no hidden agendas. All of these things are really good. Very supportive by Charlie. Open-minded and humble team members. Interesting that you use the word humble. When we close out today's session, we're going to look at a model from Lencioni called the ideal team player. And the word humble is a key part of the 3 parts that it takes to make up an ideal team player. So we'll look at some of these things as well. Hey, excellent job with just engaging and interacting and thinking through what it means or what characteristics you've seen and you've experienced yourselves on great teams. Certainly, what we want to do is do everything we can in our power as an individual contributor, as a manager, as a leader within our organization to make teams these types of teams that you've just described here. And so today, that's really going to be our focus. I want to share just a story. This is something that research has taken place on the quest to build the best tower using only supplies that include 1 yard of tape, 1 yard of string, 20 pieces of uncooked spaghetti, and 1 marshmallow. I mean, it's an interesting concept of how you would build a tower like this. Talk to me again via chat around what goes into a successful build like this. If you were tasked with building this type of tower within a time frame of the official project is 18 minutes, tell me what goes into a successful build like this. What has to happen to produce a great work of art, of engineering prowess, architectural design, and final construction? What goes into this? Organization, planning, communication. Yes, great. Communication, definitely. Appreciate that. Other thoughts? What goes into a successful build like this as you think about this type of a tower, this type of a project? Teams, ideas, planning, communication, vision. Excellent. All of these great, good ideas. Solid components as it relates to really teams and leadership, right? Everything that you're sharing. Each person has a role. Yeah. Everybody's role is vital, right? And so all of these things are really important. What I love about this type of project and this type of story is the research really pits 2 classes of age groups against each other. And it's a little disconcerting given the fact that I do work for a university that has MBA students, but the work of the project in the original research really pitted kindergartners against MBA students. And the challenge was to build this tower using the yard of string, the yard of tape, 20 uncooked spaghetti noodles, and 1 marshmallow. It seems like it's a simple task, right? It seems like, hey, if we plan right, if we have good organization, if we have open communication, if we're sharing ideas, if we have a clear vision of what we need to do and how we need to do it, and we appreciate everyone's role, man, we should be able to knock this out of the park, right? And surely, I mean, beyond question, surely the MBA students should vastly outperform the kindergarten group. This would be my assumption. Maybe it's your assumption. If it is, you may be surprised at some of the results. The study that has been conducted, and now this project is repeated multiple times across several business schools. It's repeated multiple times in organizational leadership development programs with companies. So this is not new or innovative, but when it first came out, the Build the Tower really was focused on how do kindergartners compare to MBA students, and the results were dramatically different. For the kindergarten students, the towers averaged 26 inches tall. I think, wow, I guess that seems pretty tall, a decent height. I wonder what was the MBA students, 30, 35, 40, how tall, how many inches tall were the MBA students' tower? They averaged less than 10 inches. Less than 10 inches. Now, again, right now, I'm part of a university. We have a college of business. We have MBA programs. We have MBA students. man, we're not faring too well against the kindergartners here. Some things that came out in the research as far as the difference between the interaction between the groups. The kindergartners were unsophisticated. They were inexperienced. Whereas you look at the MBA students and you'd start to think that maybe some of these things are strengths that the MBA students had. You know, they're thinking strategically. They are generating options and working through that. The kindergartners, instead of, you know, thinking strategically and working and diagnosing, they just jumped right in and started putting things together. They weren't competing for status in what they did. They worked energetically in all of their engagements together. They would experiment, put this here, do this, try this. They would take risks. It didn't matter. They weren't concerned. They were just playing with spaghetti and marshmallows, right? They would look and notice outcomes and then build upon those. So the research really identified a number of things within the kindergartners as it relates to how they were working together. And then they compared that to the MBA students. The MBA students really were trying to figure out where they fit in. What do I do? They were trying to figure out who's in charge. They were trying to figure out things about, you know, is this a good idea, or can I criticize an idea? Are we contributing collectively to these things? And when you start to look at some of these things in the bottom end of the MBA group, it reminds me a little bit of Bruce Tuckman's model of teams performance over time that he developed back in the 1960s that we still use today as far as the development and performance of teams over time. And what he developed and what we focus on is this concept of teams that go through stages of forming, storming, norming, and then performing. And what this happens, I'll just give you the very high level model detail of this. Tuckman says that as teams come together in this forming stage, there's this euphoric high experience of, oh yes, I'm on the team. Oh, I'm really excited to be drafted. And then as the forming stage ends and you move into storming, you realize that you weren't drafted to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you were drafted to the Detroit Lions, for example, right? And there's a totally different set of expectations versus reality. You start to figure out who's on the team and that you don't really like this person and that person. And you go through some of those things that the MBA students did. Where do I fit in? Who's in charge? What's the relationship? And as you storm, your performance goes down. As teams progress over time, they begin to normalize, or they can normalize through good, effective leadership behavior, and they can start to stabilize their understanding and then build on that to high performing teams. This is Tuckman's model: form, storm, norm, perform. And Tuckman says you have to go through all of those phases. You can't leapfrog any of those phases. Now, the truth is this model is not just strictly linear, right? You and I both know from teams that we've been on that we can be at a high performing level, but some sort of change can happen and we can struggle, and we might figure out or ask ourselves, well, what are we doing? Are we regressing in the model? Well, what's happening is the model really forms linear, but it also works cyclical. And so we form and then we storm, norm, and perform, right? We have to go through those stages, or we can go through those stages. There's no guarantee that we make it through the stages. It's all about leadership and team dynamics that moves us from stage to stage. But what happens in life is something happens, even as a high performing team, something happens. Either our product changes, someone new comes on the team. We have a different level of service. We're growing, we're expanding. There's some sort of external environment that's impacting it. We have COVID strike us, right? There's something that happens even for high performing teams that can thrust us back into the cycle of storm, norm, and then hopefully we get back to perform. But we're always going through this idea of form, storm, norm, perform. Something changes, storm, norm, perform. Something changes, storm, norm, perform. But leadership, management, and engagement, involvement, all of that drives our ability to work through this cycle and get back to high performing teams. As we think about this linear process again, and we think about the kindergartners versus the MBA students, what it seems to me is that it's almost as though the kindergartners just appear at the forming stage or at the performing stage. It's almost as though as they jump into the project, they're just all in, contributing, involved, and working through. And I don't necessarily think that it's just they magically poofed and appeared at the performing stage. I think they rammed through those other stages to get to the point of jumping in. They formed, they quickly recognized that we're all in. There was very little storming. There was very little need to norm because they were fully committed in how they interacted together. And that's the key thing about these kindergartners versus the MBA students. Too often, we focus just on the individual skill. What can I do, right? We focus on what we can see as it relates to the individual skill. But what really is critical is not just the individual skills that we have, but the collective interaction of those individual skills together in the context of team. Daniel Coy, who we'll look at later in our session as well, says what really matters is the interaction. Now, back in 2004, I think it was, I remember watching the Detroit Pistons, and I remember watching them in the NBA Finals where they were able to win the World Championship, win the title. And I remember as the last game came to a conclusion or was coming to a conclusion, and it was clear that they were going to win, that they were going to be crowned champions. Exciting moment for Detroit, exciting moment for our state, exciting moment for anyone that was a Detroit Pistons fan, right? I remember hearing the announcers say they're going to have a really difficult time picking an MVP for the NBA Finals because the Pistons in this era didn't necessarily have just one standout person. It wasn't like we had our Michael Jordan. It wasn't like we had our LeBron James. It wasn't like we had, our Isaiah Thomas back from the 1990s even. This team just worked collectively together. And even the announcers said, man, they are going to have a difficult time picking an MVP because it was all about the team. It was all about the interaction. And this is what we love. We love these sorts of situations, right? But we also know not every team is like this. Sometimes teams function more like our friends in Peanuts, where Linus is talking to his sister Lucy. Why are you always so anxious to criticize me? Lucy says, I just think I have a knack for seeing other people's faults. To which Linus says, what about your own faults? And Lucy says, I have a knack for overlooking them. This sort of interaction, this sort of team dynamic that we can fall prey to is totally disruptive and totally different than the type of team that we want to see and that we would expect to see from the standpoint of a high performing team. There was a study that was done by Google. Google looked at a 3-year study of 180 teams within their organization, trying to identify what it was that really made teams stand out. And they had some ideas going into it that they thought their research would validate, and they came away a little bit surprised. I've got about a 2 or 3 minute video here that I'd like to share and have us watch that helps explain this, and then we'll dig into what research shows on teams for teams. So let's watch this video together.
Technology companies encourage their employees to work together because studies show that teams tend to innovate faster, achieve higher productivity, see mistakes more quickly, and find better solutions to problems. Yet, not every team is successful. So how do you build a highly effective team that is capable of delivering expected results? A study run by Google will shed some light on this question and help us identify traits that all successful Google teams shared. Several years ago, Google launched an internal project Aristotle, which was a huge data study focused on the teamwork. The tech giant spent millions of dollars tracking 180 separate teams for 3 years. The goal of the project was simple yet ambitious: to find out what are the traits of the highest performing teams. In other words, the company wanted to know why some teams stumbled while others soared. Initially, the researchers' hypothesis was that maybe best teams had members who liked each other a lot, or there was a healthy mix of personality types, or the team members were friends outside of work. Yet, none of these seemed to matter. The researchers could not find any meaningful patterns in the data. Basically, there was no evidence that a mix of specific personality types, or skills, or backgrounds made any difference. The who part of the equation didn't seem to matter. As the researchers continued to study the groups, they noticed two behaviors that all of the best teams shared. First is that the team members spoke in roughly the same proportion, a phenomenon that researchers call inequality in distribution of conversational turn-taking. On some teams, everyone spoke during each task, while on others, leadership shifted among teammates from assignment to assignment. But in each case, at the end of the day, everyone had spoken roughly the same amount. In other words, as long as everyone got a chance to talk, the team did well. But if only one person or a small group spoke all the time, the collective intelligence declined. Second, the good teams all had high average social sensitivity, a fancy way of saying they were skilled at reading how others felt based on their tone of voice, their expressions, and other nonverbal cues. One of the easiest ways to determine social sensitivity is to show someone photos of a person's eyes and ask to describe what that person is feeling. An exam known as the reading the mind in the eyes. People on successful teams scored about average on this test. They seemed to know when someone was feeling upset or left out. People on less effective teams, in contrast, scored below average. They seemed to be less sensitive towards their colleagues. By the end of the project, researchers came to a conclusion that it didn't matter who was on the team. What mattered was how team members treated each other. Teams where everybody talked and everybody showed respect by listening and paying attention created psychologically safe atmosphere inside the team. And psychological safety of each member in the group had a positive effect on the team's ability to succeed.
So fascinating information as we think about what does it mean to have a high impact team. I love when large organizations outside of your traditional academic research based entities are doing research and producing some sort of end result from what they've learned. And so what we want to do is we want to look and diagnose what came out from this study on Google and what they found with their teams, and then how that might relate back into our teams. We'll look at one corresponding study as well that kind of validates the legitimacy of what we're going to see from Google. And then we'll look at what does it take for us as leaders and managers to impact these things on our teams as we move forward. I love this concept of what Google named their study, the Aristotle Project. The quote from Aristotle that really drove them to naming it this was, "The whole is greater than the sum of its parts." And that's really what we're driving toward in high impact teams, that collectively what we can accomplish together equals more than what we are able to do independently. And so a number of things I think that are helpful. So what Google learned and what we're going to look at and really dive into is it matters less about, who's on the team, that identity, the concept of do they like each other, are they friendly, is there an equal good mix of personality. Those things matter less than this overarching theme of how the team worked together. And then in order of importance of what came out from this, which I think is helpful for us, are things as it relates to building high impact teams. And the first thing that we see, and that we even heard in the video, was this whole concept of psychological safety. Psychological safety. I think as you think about psychological safety, it's this idea of individuals that understand that in the midst of the team and the team dynamic and the experience and the exposure that they have with others, that there's an ability, an appreciation, a willingness to try something, to take a risk, to ask a question, to have some sort of action behavior that flies in the face of being fearful of how that's going to be received or perceived. Psychological safety says, in the team, I will feel willing and able to contribute ideas or to say X, Y, or Z, not thinking that my team will criticize me, think I'm an idiot, or that I'll stumble or be perceived as someone who is incompetent in the role. It's critical for psychological safety in order for us to generate the ideas that we talked about earlier in our session, to build upon the concept of, I think that's a good idea. But when Kathy chimes in, it becomes a better idea. And when Charlie contributes, it becomes a best idea, right? You can think that holistically around the team, moving from good to better to best. How do we generate that? By the psychological safety in creating the space that it's okay to contribute. It's okay to contribute and be wrong. It's okay to ask a dumb question, because there are really no dumb questions. You're just trying to learn, engage, and think through and grow in that. Psychological safety is critical for how we function in our teams. And there are things that we can and should do that create the space for psychological safety. There are some personal work preferences that you have and that you could and should implement. Some simple things that we know and that we've heard about that help create psychological safety in organizations are things like, hey, there's an open door policy here, meaning if I'm the leader, if I'm the manager, if I'm the team lead, whatever my title is, I want you to know that I'm welcoming feedback. I am not sitting in an ivory tower looking down from above and criticizing you or questioning you. We are in this together, right? This idea of brainstorming together, that collectively on the team, regardless of title, I'm willing to hear your idea and put that into practice. I'm willing to share my idea with you without fear that you're going to take it, run with it, and take credit for it. Psychological safety creates these types of engagement experiences that really communicate that we are all in on this together. There's an organization that I'm working with that's really working through some succession planning concepts between their current CEO and then the future CEO. And as these two individuals meet with other leaders within the organization, especially independently as they're working on different projects or those types of things, it's very clear that there are two dramatic divergent approaches to how these individuals engage with the concept of team. The current leader will show up, he will arrive, he will work through his agenda, he will leave the meeting, and there's very little group interaction, discussion, dialogue, relationship building. The successor comes in, dialogues, relationship builds, works through an agenda, but in a collaborative experience, in a collaborative manner. There is a totally different sense of appreciation within the organization that is demonstrated and communicated between the two types of leaders that are currently functioning. This idea of how you build psychological safety in what you do in your teams will make or break this concept of what your team is able to accomplish. As we think about building high impact teams, it has to have this component of psychological safety. And I would go back, and it comes to what was shared earlier in the session by Noah. It comes back to trust, right? Psychological safety is easiest to achieve when we have a sense of trust. The second key element that was identified within the Google research is dependability. Dependability. The truth is, on dependable teams, we are full of individuals that can be counted on, right? Not holding people accountable, but I am accountable to myself for myself. I am a countable person. I am someone that can be counted on in the clutch moment, right? I'm a clutch player. I'm not a crutch player for the team. Members are reliable in what they communicate and what they do and how they will do it. Their work is done, it's done on time, and it's quality. This idea of accepting responsibility versus shirking responsibility. And what are some ways that you've been able to help foster within your organization or within your team, how do you foster dependability? I'll give you a second to think about that. Within your team or within your organization, how do you foster dependability amongst the participants that make up your team or your organization? Think about that for just a second. If you want to chime in on chat and share some thoughts, ideas of how you drive dependability, how it's been driven for you. Maybe you're not the driver. Maybe you've identified how people have done that. If you want to share that in chat just from an idea standpoint, that'd be fantastic. I'll give you a few seconds to think through that. Don't everybody type at once. It will overload the system. So you got some thoughts here on what would drive dependability within your organization? Tools, techniques, ways that you've been able to drive that. As you're thinking, I'll just give you a couple tools that we found and that are helpful. Bob shared accountability, right? Yeah, if you can hold each other accountable and have accountability as a component of your organizational culture, that should drive dependability, right? Excellent. Leading by example, absolutely, Greg. If you're not leading by example in the area of dependability, it's hard to ask other people to be dependable, right? So if I'm dependable, it has a higher likelihood of leaking out or seeping out to others within the organization or others within the team. Do what you say and say what you do. Love that concept. I'm actually working on something right now where I talk specifically, and this is built into the slide presentation here, where I talk about be a DWYSYWD person. What in the world does that mean? It just stands for do what you say you will do. Do what you say you will do. If you want to be dependable, if you want to create dependability, lead by example. You have to do what you say you will do, and you have to hold other people accountable to do what they say they will do. Everyone on the team knows what's expected of them. Clear communication. Absolutely, Sue. Do I know what I'm supposed to do? Is there clear communication? Is there some check-in along the way? Or did someone just show up and throw up in my office all the things that they expect without any clear understanding on my behalf of what the target is, what the end game is, what it's expected to look like? Excellent examples here of what it means to, excuse me, drive dependability within organizations. There are some tools that you can use that help foster that type of dependability. We talk often and work with organizations often on using the RACIC or the RASCI model, depending on what the order of how you work that. But just helping people to understand who is responsible for this versus who needs to be informed or who needs to be consulted, right? And that's a dramatically different type of ownership or result from driving the result, owning the result versus just informing or getting consultation through. Another example of dependability, I was working with an organization, this was a number of years ago, and the executive leadership team said, yeah, we actually a long time ago were having significant problems on having a leadership team meeting and then leaving the meeting and people not remembering what was discussed, not remembering what the final solution was, not remembering what they committed to. And they said what we did at the time, and this was innovative back then, they said what we did at the time was in our leadership team meetings, we would have a flip chart and we would just make a note of the commitments that we decided as a leadership team. And then at the end of every meeting, the leadership team members, before they exited the conference room, they had to sign their name, with a marker on that flip chart that identified, the commitments. And this was then kept on record, kept on file by the CEO. So it dramatically reduced the confusion of what did we agree to? What did I say I was going to do? What was my commitment? You have to find ways to drive dependability. And if it's not inherent to your team, you have to identify what role can you play as an individual contributor or as a team leader to enhance that concept of dependability. The third element that came through in the Google study was structure and clarity. This kind of goes to what Sue said. Everyone on the team knows what's expected of them. Clear communication, structure, and clarity. The fact that an individual's understanding of the job and the ability to perform those expectations in a fulfilling and conscientious manner is clearly understood, clearly communicated, that there's a knowledge of what is said matches what is demonstrated by me as a team member. These things are critical. One of the tools that we use regularly within my team and then with organizations that we work with and happen to be used by Google as well is called OKRs. OKRs. What it stands for is objectives as measured by key results. Objectives as measured by key results. These are excellent ideas of what it means to have clear short-term targets that are understood and that create a sense of structure around my activity today is rolling up into this overarching objective that we have for the next month, the next 3 months, OKRs. This was built within Google and was published in a book called Measure What Matters, an excellent read if you're looking for a deeper dive in how to use OKRs and what organizations have used OKRs successfully in the past. Structure and clarity is critical and extremely important as it relates to what matters in teams. So the big question is, how can we work to improve structure and clarity? Things like OKRs, helping people to understand what they do rolls up into the organization, and then regularly communicating that to your team. We have weekly team meetings, and every week I go through our KPIs that we have as an organization or as a department, and I go through how those KPIs ladder up into the overarching organization as well. I want our team members to understand, and I want them to know what happens and what matters. The fourth element here is meaning. The fourth element that came out from the Google study is meaning, finding a sense of purpose within the work, whether it's the work itself, whether it's the output of the work and outcome, but that there's some sense of meaning within the individual's contribution to what that team is contributing to. And the truth is that this meaning can vary dramatically by person to person within your team. For some, the sense of meaning and purpose is, hey, what am I earning, right? What's the almighty dollar? I am driven by the financial reward. For some, it's the financial reward contributes to something a little bit broader that, hey, I can provide for my family. That's really important. Sometimes it's helping the team succeed or helping the organization succeed or constructing, valuable input. But what is that sense of meaning? What is that sense of purpose? And what do I need to communicate around these things as it relates to the organization and the team? This is critical. If you're a team leader, it's critical for you to appreciate and wrap your arms around this element of meaning in team development. Patrick Lencioni wrote a book several years ago called 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. It actually got its title changed because they wanted to have a more positive spin on the title. So that the new title is something like The Truth Behind Employee Engagement or something like that. But I've always appreciated the first original title. And I've never bought the new book with the updated title. I love the concept of 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. And in that work, Lencioni identifies that the 3 signs are anonymity, meaning as an employee, your employer doesn't know you, doesn't know who you are, doesn't know things about you that you want him or her to know and inquire about. Obviously, we don't want to be a completely open book to everybody, right? But you want to be known and you want to know others, just what it means to be human. The second clear sign of a miserable job is irrelevance, that what I do has no impact, no bearing, no meaning, right, to the overarching organization that I'm a part of. And the third sign of a miserable job is immeasurement. Even if I feel like someone knows me and cares about me, and I understand the greater purpose that I can accomplish to the organization or to the goal that we have, if I have no real sign to know that I have won at the end of the day, if there's an immeasurable aspect to that, I can be feeling job misery because did I win or did I fail today? I have no idea, but I felt good about it, right? And so you really want all of these things working together. And as a leader, to build high impact teams, it's our job to fight against the push of job misery, where we can feel like we're too busy to focus on really knowing our team members or knowing each other, that we're too busy, or it doesn't really matter if people really understand the relevance of what they're doing, or minimize the value of measuring the ability to be successful. We have to incorporate meaning into our teams as leaders. And if we're not the leader, we're an individual contributor, we have to proactively pursue these sorts of things of feeling known, understanding our relevance, asking those questions, and driving for the right type of measurement. These things are critical for us as we function together. The next key element that the Google study identified was impact. Again, as we think back to that last slide, relevance and measurement, it really leads us into this next component here of impact. The results of one's work, really the subjective judgment of did this matter or didn't it matter? This result of one's work of that it's making a difference, it's critically important for our teams, critically important for our teams. Again, we have weekly team meetings within IPEX. Not only do I go with through our KPIs, but the kickoff of every meeting, I go back to the organization's vision and mission and what we do to fulfill that. And often I'll share a little anecdote, a little story, an illustration, and several times over the course of a year, I'll just open it up for the team members to say, tell me about how you've seen us live out our mission over the last couple weeks. What are some stories that you've been holding in that you haven't shared yet? We have to create space for our teams to appreciate the impact and how it rolls up into the larger picture of the organization. Impact is critical. Impact is critical. We were working with an organization actually up in the Great Lakes Bay region. And as we were working with them and we heard from some participants through the program that we were developing and working through, I was blown away by one of the participants' perspective on what he does. And the organization was actually working on a project for an agricultural organization. And because of the work that this person was doing in their company for this other company, he linked directly to the vision of the other company. And when he answered the question, what do you really do? He said, I get to help feed the world. I get to help feed the world, because he was linking with this agricultural organization's mission that said, we feed the world. That's a pretty powerful component, pretty powerful statement to see someone who's in construction link all the way to what their customer's vision and mission is all about. Our ability to communicate that impact is critical. It reminded me of the story in the 1960s after our former President Kennedy said, we are going to the moon. And NASA put an incredible amount of focus and effort within that decade to pursue the moon missions. There was a group of senators that went to NASA and toured NASA in that time frame. And as they were going through their tour, they came across someone from the custodial department. And one of the senators said, so tell me, what do you do for NASA? And the expectation was, well, I keep level 3, spick and span, really, really clean. Or I focus on the executive suite, or my job is to make sure all the latrines are clean, right? Looking at some sort of reaction like that. When they asked the custodial crew member, what do you do for NASA? The reaction was, I help put someone on the moon. I help put someone on the moon. That was an organization where someone dramatically understood their impact to the overarching mission. Our ability to appreciate, to understand, and to share with our teams the impact that they're making beyond dollars and cents, beyond whatever it is that the tactical stuff that our teams do, we have to link it to something broader. We have to link it to impact. So Google went through and they did this study and they identified, hey, everything that matters to a team to create high performing, high impact team really came through in these elements: psychological safety, dependability, structure and clarity, meaning, and impact. Now you maybe are thinking, well, that's Google. Does that really gel with the rest of the world? And this is what I think is interesting. Daniel Coyle wrote the book, The Culture Code. And in all of his research, which is expansive across a number of different industries, he identified 3 skills at the heart of great teamwork, and you'll see some similarities here. Build safety to make everyone feel comfortable in working together. There's a lot of correlation to what we just saw within the Google study. The second, share vulnerability to show no one needs to be perfect. This doesn't mean that you have to have a cry fest every day at the office, right? This is opening yourself up to showcase that you are not Mr. or Miss Perfect, that you have mistakes, that you have errors, that you have issues that you're working to overcome. And your ability to freely share that helps other people recognize that they don't need to be perfect either. And if you're concerned about whether that's going to open up some perspective or show a sign of weakness, I'm just going to guarantee you that your team already knows you're not perfect. So don't be afraid of showcasing that vulnerability in a proactive manner anyway. And then third, according to Daniel Coyle's research, establish purpose through a common goal and clear path to get there. Again, this whole idea of impact and ability to showcase meaning in what we do and how we do it. So as we think about high impact teams, there are clear things that teams can and should experience as we work together. But the truth is, so much of what happens in a team and so much of what happens in an organization is also conditioned upon the manager or the leader. And so for just the final few minutes, I want to challenge those of us who are in that position of management or leadership. And what does that mean? Gallup worked through and identified that managers account for at least 70% of the variance in employee engagement. That is dramatic. That is dramatic. That's why you hear so often people don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. And so our jobs as leaders, our jobs as managers is to make sure that we are driving the right type of engagement for our organizations and for our teams. Behaviors and characteristics that Gallup identified of managers that have great engagement within their teams are managers that build relationships, create trust, open dialogue. They create a culture of clear accountability. Again, a number of things that we saw in chat earlier. They motivate every single employee. They have assertiveness to drive outcomes and the ability to overcome adversity and resistance. They make decisions on productivity, not politics. And I think all of these behaviors, as managers and leaders demonstrate them, it has a direct impact and correlation to team. And so the question is, what kind of manager are you as it relates to your role on the team, in the team? An excellent book by Marshall Goldsmith was What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And what he identified is that too often managers and leaders think that they are successful because of the totality of behavior that they demonstrate. But what Goldsmith identified and did an excellent job in communicating is that often leaders and managers are successful in spite of a number of their components that they bring to the managerial or leadership table. And so our challenge is to not equate all of our behavior as the reason for our success, but identify what are we doing that has created success in spite of our behaviors, and work to change those to positively impact our teams and our team dynamic. So much of that is just the simple concept of the type of interactions that we have with each other and with our team members. And a model that we use regularly and encourage others to use is the GROW model. I just wanted to showcase this in a simple picture. The GROW model of conversation really is all about a path of a conversation together. You see, we've got our hiker here in the middle of some unknown desert. This hiker has a certain location that he or she is trying to get to. We would call that the goal, right? Trying to get to the peak location over in that area. That's the goal. We all have goals that we're driving toward, but we also then have a secondary part in this conversation about not just the goal, where are we going, but what is our present reality, right? So the GROW model has goal as the starting point. Where are we trying to get to? The reality of where we are. And then the third aspect in the GROW model are the obstacles that stand in our way. What hinders our current reality from being the goal that we want to achieve? The second part of the O are the options that we could have as it relates to overcoming those obstacles. And then the W is just choosing a way forward, trial and error, figure it out. But for some of us on this call and in this session, if we really want to overcome some of that in spite of behavior that we have, it's shifting the type of conversations we have within our team to generate the type of dialogue, interaction, movement from good, better to best ideas of following the GROW model of what's the goal, what's my present reality, what are the obstacles that stand in my way, what are some options that I have to overcome those, and then choosing a way forward that would bring us to success. Finally, a helpful tool from Lencioni really looks at what he calls the ideal team player. You'll have access to this presentation, so if you find this of value, we only have a few minutes left. Don't feel like you have to radically scramble or scribble the notes down. But in the ideal team player, he talks about someone who is humble. Again, that word was used earlier in our session. Excellent word, humble, hungry, and smart. But the ideal team player has all three of those things functioning together. And when you don't, if you only have the humble, you're known as the pawn, the someone who's unassuming, kind of hides in the background. They don't make waves, but they really don't do a whole lot. If you only have the hungry, you have the bulldozer. This is someone who kind of just does their own thing, bulldozes their way through. It's all about them and how they can pursue and what they need to move through. If you only have the smart, you have the charmer. You have someone who is willing to talk big, but maybe doesn't always follow through and contribute to what they can. If you have someone who's humble and hungry but lacks smart, they're the accidental mess maker. They show up and kind of things just fall out of control because they don't have that smartness of not a mental IQ capacity, but the smartness of what it means to be thinking critically and strategically. Those that are humble and smart are the lovable slacker. They're great, just don't expect them to do anything. Those that are smart and hungry are the skillful politicians, people that are willing to say and do whatever they can, but not necessarily focused for the good of the team. But as you think about bringing all of these things together, the ideal team player, someone who is humble, doesn't think more of him or herself than he should, someone who's hungry, has a drive, someone who's smart, can think strategically, you're bringing someone together on the team that is for the team. And I think as we think about what it means to be an ideal team player and what that means to build high-performing teams, I hope not only do we model this, but we recruit this to our teams. In so doing, I think those things, those actions, those attitudes help drive us to bring high-performing teams to the organizations that we serve. It's been a real pleasure today to work through this concept and topic with you. I want to thank Kathy and Associated Builders and Contractors of Greater Michigan again for allowing me to contribute. I've really appreciated learning from you some thoughts that you have along the way, and hopefully today's session was helpful. IPEX is the corporate training consulting arm for Davenport University. My contact information is there. I'd love to connect with you on LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm on Facebook too, but most of that is just pictures of my family and what we do on vacation. So probably a little less intriguing for you as it relates to development. We do offer publicly available leadership development programs in project management, areas of health, human resources management. You can see the list. And then also we work with organizations in a very custom way on any of those program topics, consulting and coaching, strategic planning, and then organizational development. If I could be of assistance to you or my team could, I'd love to hear from you. But I really want to say thank you for the time today and for our opportunity to spend a few minutes together thinking about this critically important topic of building high impact teams. So Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Dan, thank you so much. That was really amazing. I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure everyone else did too, on the tools to create a high impact team. Amazing. Thanks everyone for attending. We hope that you enjoyed this, and I wanted to let you know our next speaker series will be held in August. I'm still waiting to hear back from Profix Software, and they are a new member that will be doing the presentation, but I will send that out as soon as I hear back from them. So thanks everyone again, and have a great afternoon. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks everybody. Thank you.